New conversations emerging now around the set of findings by the Competition Commission that will regulate how websites are able to sell you goods on the line, or changes to the regulations, I should say. About 2 months ago, the Competition Commission inquiry into the industry made findings that led to the demand for some sites to make changes to how they operate. For example, Takealot was told that it must manage its division selling goods on the website and its division advertising goods for sale separately, and it could no longer demand that suppliers give them their lowest price on Takealot. In other words, in the past, a supplier might be told they could not sell their goods for a price on their own website that was lower than the price they sold it for on Takealot. But there are also other questions around this. What it may mean, for example, for Amazon, which is due to enter our market in the next few months, hasn't done so yet. James Hodge is the Chief Economist at the Competition Commission. James, good afternoon to you, and thank you very much indeed for your time. It's quite a technical area. I do want to start with this. Do you have the powers to regulate Amazon, a foreign company operating in our market?
We certainly do. Unfortunately, it has not entered our market, so there is nothing to regulate so far. But throughout this inquiry, we've had engagements with Amazon about what's expected if and when it does enter. And the inquiry also set out quite clearly that expectation and recommendation that upon entry, it is expected to comply with very similar provisions that we've imposed on Takealot, and which in fact are being imposed on Amazon in Europe right now. And so we fully expect them to comply, and if they don't, we would obviously look to take action.
So, I mean, it's a strange and brave new world, the way all of this works now, but where a company is headquartered has no impact on how it is regulated by you. No.
The Competition Act regulates firms that have an effect in South Africa. And so even, for instance, a Booking.com that has a small local office, which is headquarters in the Netherlands, fully remains within our powers to regulate. So Amazon, we found no issue with them shipping from abroad. That's a very small business as it remains now into South Africa, and didn't affect competition. But as soon as they set up and have a physical presence, they're obviously firmly within our jurisdiction.
Okay, so that then means then that there's, I presume, a level playing field. I mean, there might be all sorts of differences inside companies or the way they operate. Some might be more efficient than others. But there's a level playing field. I mean, Takealot's not the only South African website that sells goods. There are plenty of others, maybe the biggest. But there's a level playing field between the Amazons of the world, the Takealots of the world, and the smaller competitors here.
Well, there hasn't been a level playing field in the past, and that's why there are recommendations that also go beyond Takealot to, for instance, Google search. So a big focus of the inquiry was how Google search is your entry point into sort of the online world, can shape who gets those clicks, those valuable clicks from consumers, and are directed to their websites where they can then hopefully sell them a product. Now, because your search page is dominated by ads at the top, most big platforms have the budget to appear in most of your clicks and get the majority of traffic. So the online platform actually looked to impose on Google remedies to rectify that in order to promote smaller platforms and allow them more space at the top. But it also asked that Google introduce a particular platform sort of unit at the top, which allows us to search for South African platforms. And that's where, in fact, Takealot will benefit in the future, potentially, as opposed to Amazon. Because we have been acutely aware of how do South African platforms compete with global ones. And certainly in things like travel booking, the dominance of a foreign player, Booking.com, has meant there are remedies to try and elevate South African platforms and enable them to compete. And then other remedies to help smaller platforms as well. You know, ultimately, we want a more competitive landscape, not just one or two players.
This is a technical area. You conducted an inquiry. You, in fact, chaired that inquiry, if I remember correctly. There is, after an inquiry like this and after your findings, there's a little bit of shouting, maybe on the part of one party screaming. And then there's also a period during which people can lodge an appeal. I think that period is now over. Have appeals come? Do you think that the recommendations, or the sort of remedial actions you've insisted on here, are they now going to be enforced? Is everyone now going to have to comply with all of these, and that's the end of it?
Yes, Stephen. In fact, yesterday was the final day for lodging an appeal, and there were some appeals. But for the majority of platforms actually have not sought to appeal and will be now implementing these remedies. And amongst them is the Naspers group. So Takealot, Mr. D, Food Delivery, and Property 24 and Auto Trader amongst them. But also Google. And I think we respect those that have sought to engage positively and may not always agree with everything we have found. But there was a long period of agreement and negotiation over appropriate remedies. And so all of those will be implementing. So, in fact, a lot of the positive effects that we expect to happen will roll out throughout online classifieds, software application stores, Google search, e-commerce, food delivery. And so this economy should start to see a change in inclusion as well of smaller businesses, black-owned businesses in the digital economy.
I realize it's impossible to quantify the impact of these kinds of regulations. Well, I presume it's impossible to quantify. But would you expect it to make, let me use the word, a significant difference to what people actually see? In other words, in a year's time, do you think that people are going to have a slightly different experience shopping online to what they've become used to in the past?
Certainly, I mean, with any remedies, you're trying to forecast, could this change the extent of competition in the market, and some of them may be less effective than we've hoped. But there are certainly a lot of remedies out there that we think will change the way people are exposed to this. So for one, Google search in South Africa will change its look. It will have South African badges to show you what are South African sites. It will have a South African filter. On the Google Play Store, you'll have a curation of South African apps. And for smaller platforms and smaller app developers, they'll get ad credits that enable them to get more visibility and in front of the eyeballs of South African consumers. There's ad transparency. So globally, most of these platforms will label an ad if it's an ad that has been promoted to the top slot or at a boost in ranking. That's not been the case in South Africa, and that's going to change, which means consumers will be aware with, if they're looking for an automobile, whether the one on the top is the best or it's just advertised. And that will help their choice, certainly. And I think for small business, this is where the big impact is, Stephen, because a reason we chose this inquiry is it does affect business and the economy and a lot of small businesses. And even on the Takealot remedies, it's looking how can one have fairer competition from the small players reliant on Takealot for the distribution, which is a benefit to them, but that they're not exploited for that in the process. So fairer rules for that should see them thrive, and in fact should help Takealot if it does face Amazon in the market. But across all of these platforms, small business is likely to either see a major drop in price to make it more affordable. So on online classifieds, the price drops are well over 50% for small estate agents and auto dealers, about a 1.5% commission fee drop on Mr. D Food for small independent restaurants. And all of the platforms are also implementing a program to support black-owned businesses on the platforms, because we found that this is not an inclusive environment. And those include free onboarding, fee waivers for a period of time, free promotion of their products. And that will include those selling products on Takealot, who are looking at a program to support small, rural and female-based businesses as well. To those advertising on classifieds, app store developers, and hotels and others. So I think there is a big change that we may see, and consumers should see that even in the interface. But they may also see businesses they never did before when they go and purchase online.
Thank you very much indeed. James Hodge is the Chief Economist at the Competition Commission. Really do appreciate the time. Many technical issues here, but it should, in the end, have a big impact on you. In other